Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So we'll be hearing today a little about St. Patrick. His commemorated feast day is today. And, it's a sad thing. We have all of this civil and popular cultural recognition of Saints' Day. People talk about Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day. You see signs all over the place. St. Paddy's Day celebration. They don't even think about the actual saint that this feast day is about. And I think the Catholic Church is kind of missing out on that. Everything's about the marginalized and the forgotten, and this history month, that history month. We should have Catholic History Month, only it's 11 months long, right? Because that's how much we have to do with anyways. So, remind people if you see them, like who the actual St. Patrick was and maybe a little bit about him. But as his actual life is only known from two short works, the Confessio, written by his spiritual autobiography written by St. Patrick himself, and a letter to Croticus, which is a denunciation of British mistreatment of the Irish. And that's all the way back in the 4th century. It was happening even way back then also. St. Patrick himself was not from Ireland. He was not Irish himself. He was British. He was born at the end of the 4th century in the year 390 in Britain along the border of Wales and England. And when he was about 14 or 15, he was captured in a raid by Irish pirates who took him back to Ireland, and he was forced to work as a shepherd, as a slave, for the next 6 years. Now, his family circumstances are known. His father was Calpurnius, who was a deacon and a minor local official. His family and village wasn't razed to the ground. It wasn't an attack. He was just actually kidnapped. So he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the providence of God works, it happened to be the right place at the right time for the salvation of Ireland, as we will see. So he worked as a shepherd away from his family, and in fact even removed from Irish society. And he says that he was here in this solitude as a shepherd, kind of alone by himself. He finally learned how to pray and meditate. So despite being the son of a deacon in the church, perhaps his religious instruction hadn't been very good, or perhaps he hadn't paid attention like he should have. In any case, that was now remedied. And as they say, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. And so St. Patrick did this. How many people these days, we hear about reparations for slavery, which happened 200 years ago. Well, here St. Patrick was a slave, and he made the best of it. And he says, the love of God and his fear grew in me more and more, as did the faith, and my soul was raised, so that in a single day I have said as many as 100 prayers, and in the night nearly the same. I prayed in the woods and on the mountains before dawn, and I felt no hurt from the snow or ice or rain. Right? So deep was he in meditation. So that should be our response to misfortune, is use it as an opportunity to draw closer to God. And it was perhaps here, or at least later under its influence, that St. Patrick composed the Lorica prayer, the Breastplate of St. Patrick, where he says, I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, confession of the oneness, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me. You may have come across that prayer, the Lorica prayer of St. Patrick. This is where he would have gotten the inspiration for it. Now, interestingly, he had a dream in which he saw the children of Ireland reaching out their hands to him and pleading for conversion. And so he began to be filled with a desire of converting this nation, which had taken him captive and made him a slave. But what would he do? How could he do anything, a slave, with no means, no education, and no hope? Well, after 6 years of captivity, St. Patrick is now about 20 years old, and he hears in a dream a very clear voice saying, Patrick, your ship is ready. And so he awoke in the morning. I'm like, my ship is ready. What does this even mean? But he's inspired, and so he makes preparations, and that very day he began walking towards the coastland of Ireland, which was 200 miles away. And all of this on a dream, a voice in a dream, Patrick, your ship is ready. So after walking 200 miles, I mean, who knows how many days it took him, he arrives at the coast, and there he finds a ship making ready to sail to Wales, his homeland. And so he somehow convinces these sailors to let him board the ship. He does, and he goes back home. Now he's free. He's back home with his family. But although he made it back, I mean, 6 years is not too long of a time. Certainly they were overjoyed to see him. They had thought him long dead. Probably took a little bit of convincing, because it's like, you were 14 when you left, and now this 20-year-old man is here. You kind of looked like the same. So you can imagine that the reunion that would have taken place. But he couldn't shake that feeling that he wanted to go back and evangelize Ireland. And indeed, he had another vision, a dream, in which he was given a letter from an Irish messenger entitled "The Voice of the Irish." And as he read it in his dream, he actually seemed to hear Irish voices beseeching him, "We appeal to you, holy servant boy, to come and walk among us." So he writes in his autobiography that he was deeply moved and could read no more. And after that vision, he didn't need to read further. He was convinced he needed to go back to Ireland to evangelize them. But of course, he didn't go back right away. He went, and he needed to study for the priesthood, and so he traveled to France. And there he was ordained a priest and also a bishop, to be sent to Ireland and found churches and dioceses and ordain other men priests and so on. Ireland was completely pagan at this point. There wasn't like he was going into a structured society or a structured ecclesiastical environment. You have to create the environment. You're the bishop, make it happen. So that's apostolicity. So he was sent off to Ireland, but he wasn't the first. He was not the first bishop in Ireland, as some people may think, but he followed St. Palladius, who had previously been there. He was commissioned by Pope Celestine I. St. Palladius, a bishop, arrived in Ireland in the year 431, but was driven out that very same year by the hostile king of Leinster. And then Palladius traveled to Scotland and then spent the next 20 years there in Scotland. So St. Patrick arrived in Ireland on March 25th in the year 433, right? A significant date, the Annunciation of Our Lady. And there he did meet one of the most prominent chieftains. And this chieftain tried to kill him, but God miraculously protected him. And so after much work, Patrick converted this barbarian chief and began preaching to the common people with much success. Now, this cycle would be repeated many times throughout his journey. He would always be resisted by the chieftains at first. They would usually try to kill him. He would always be protected and miraculously be preserved. Local druids would confront him and challenge him to duels of magic, similar to when Moses was in the Pharaoh's court with the magicians. But he always was victorious, always came out with the power of God, more powerful than these pagan druids. But he was imprisoned many times, beaten, whipped, and so on, but always came through with God's help. Now, what assisted Patrick in evangelizing, the reason he was successful, perhaps, while Palladius had not been, was that he had been a slave for 6 years. He understood the language. He could already communicate, so that wasn't a barrier. Furthermore, Patrick understood the pagan symbols and their religion and their rituals very well. And so he was able to not only speak their language, like the actual verbal language, he could speak their language of symbols. When they would refer to, the gods of the sun or fire and so on, he knew all the background behind it, and so he was immediately able to draw a parallel to the Catholic Church. Okay, so you worship this or that. Well, here's what you're really getting at. Here's what the Church teaches, and this is what you're looking for. So that's in part why he was so successful. So one of them, for example, was that the fire. They honored their gods with fire, and so St. Patrick used a bonfire to celebrate Easter, explaining that Christ was the light in the midst of a dark world, and that the love of Christ brought warmth and love to a cold world as well. Another one was that as I mentioned, Celts worshipped the sun, and so St. Patrick would place the cross over the sun. And in fact, that's where you get the Celtic cross. It's a crucifix with that little circle around it. That's from St. Patrick, putting the cross over the sun, symbolizing that Christ created the sun and the moon and the stars, and God is above all. These heavenly things, the sun and moon and so on, those are not gods. Those are not even rational creatures. They are simply inanimate beings created by God, who is almighty. And sadly, St. Patrick was persecuted not only by the pagan Irish, but also by ecclesiastics in Britain who should have been helping him. These British clerics, out of envy, said that he had gone to France and been ordained a bishop simply for the sake of ambition and for the honor of the office itself. And so he received very little help from those who should be assisting him. And it's obviously envy and jealousy, because how much sense does it make that you want to be honored and I want to be a bishop for the honor of it, and when you're getting people trying to kill you left and right, you're going into an area that is not even Catholic, much less doesn't respect bishops. So that was obviously a false accusation there. But St. Patrick would persevere and end up converting thousands and thousands of the Irish and building dozens of churches. And in fact, I would like to give a little recognition to one man, a priest following St. Patrick, and his name was St. Odran, and I've spoken about him before. But St. Odran can be called the man who saved Ireland, as well as St. Patrick. Because once when St. Patrick was traveling, St. Odran was his chariot driver, and Odran had a premonition that an ambush had been set and they were going to try to kill St. Patrick. So without telling Patrick what was going on, his chariot driver, Odran, demanded that they trade places. And so St. Patrick went down and meekly took the reins and began driving the chariot like a servant, while St. Odran took his place in the back, the place of honor. The ambush was sprung, and before anybody knew what was happening, a spear was thrown and impaled Odran in the chest, who died in the place of St. Patrick. So that's an indication of the dangers of the place, but also the indication of how God would miraculously preserve St. Patrick, but also give opportunity to other saints to become martyrs and to show their love for God and the love of the saints for each other. So kind of a little story there about St. Patrick and his chariot driver, St. Odran. So these kinds of miracles would take place and continue for the next 40 years. And by the time it was over, St. Patrick had converted nearly the entire island. He had worked so many miracles in his lifetime, including miraculously providing food and shelter to those most in need, protection from storms, and even raising people from the dead. St. Patrick finally died on March 17th, today, in the year 461, and he himself was around 70 or 80 years old, and his grave can still be visited in the Down Cathedral in County Downpatrick there in Ireland. So that's the life of a great saint, and it had such a hard beginning. Kidnapped, separated from his family, a slave in a foreign land, all alone by himself with no resources. How could anybody have predicted that one poor shepherd boy would be the cause of the conversion of an entire island? Millions and millions of people, not just then, but for the next 1,000 years. For over 1,000 years, Ireland would become a bastion of Catholic, of the Catholic Church. In fact, it was called at one time, there were so many saints from Ireland, it was called the Island of Saints. And I would say it's certainly very, very sad today that in the past 100 years, Ireland has fallen so far from that legacy, becoming very much like the pagan nations around it once again. But it is a testament to St. Patrick that his efforts lasted almost 1,500 years, 1,500 years. The efforts of one man produced saints for centuries and centuries and centuries. And again, it was from such difficult circumstances. So who knows? Who knows today what God can do with just one generous person? One generous person. And it doesn't matter how lowly you are, how ignorant you are, how much you think you don't know, how poor you are, whatever. God can work astounding miracles through you, not just today, but for centuries to come. And perhaps I would even say those who have come from a bad background. Maybe there are those in this church who went out there, who wandered away, who spent time in the streets with the potheads and the weirdos and so on. Well, guess what? Maybe you learned their language. Now you can connect with those people, and you can be the apostle to the lunatic fringe or whatever it may be, right? That is always possible. So it doesn't matter what your background is, what it was, where you came from, where you are now. We just have to be generous, and God can do absolutely astounding things with us, in us, and through us, and so on. That really is the key. We have no idea what God's vocation may be for us, but our part of it is just to say yes. Whatever it is. You want me somewhere? Yes, I'll do it. You want me to do a very hard thing? I'll do it. You want me to sit here like a bump on a log and be nothing and have my life go nowhere? I'll do it, right? As long as that's God's will and not your own laziness, right? That's the key. You've got to be trying and giving your best effort. But if despite that nothing's happening, be at peace. Be at peace, right? Just do God's work in us, whatever that may be. So on this Feast of St. Patrick, let us thank God for giving us such great saints like him, and ask for his intercession. We may not be despondent in misfortune, but just turn to him with greater generosity. Love for God, love for our fellow man, and God can work miracles. May God bless you all in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.